The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Every eye was fixed on the prisoner, Daniel Carter, a man convicted of a crime he swore he didn't commit. His hands trembled in cuffs, but his voice was steady when he made his final request. "Your Honor," he said, his throat tight, "before my sentence, I just want to see my dog one last time." A murmur spread through the crowd. The judge frowned. "Your dog?" Daniel nodded, his eyes wet. "Rocky. He's been with me through everything. I need him to know I didn't abandon him." The prosecutor scoffed. A delay tactic, but the judge hesitated, then granted it. Under one condition, the dog would be brought in now, and this would take no more than 5 minutes. No one expected what happened next. The doors creaked open. A battered, golden-furred German shepherd limped in, his tail low. His ears perked at the sight of Daniel. Then a whimper escaped him. Rocky lunged, not toward Daniel, but at the prosecutor, snarling like a beast unleashed. Gasps filled the room. Guards rushed forward, but Rocky didn't bite. He pinned the man down, growling, his nose pressed hard against the prosecutor's sleeve. Then he started digging, claws frantic against the man's suit. Daniel's face went pale. "Rocky, what are you doing?" The answer would change everything. The courtroom erupted into chaos as Rocky, the German shepherd, clawed desperately at the prosecutor's sleeve. The man's face twisted in panic, his arms flailing as he tried to push the dog away. Guards rushed forward, tasers drawn, but before they could act, something metallic clattered to the floor. A small silver USB drive that had been hidden inside the prosecutor's cuff. The room froze. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He knew that USB. It was the same one that had gone missing the night he was arrested, the one that held the security footage from his shop, the footage that could prove his innocence. Rocky backed away, panting, his job done. The judge's eyes narrowed as he picked up the drive. "What is this?" he demanded. The prosecutor's face drained of color. I don't know how that got there," he stammered. But it was too late. The judge signaled for a recess and ordered the footage to be played immediately. As the video flickered to life on the courtroom screen, the truth unfolded in grainy, unshakable detail. It showed the real thief, a masked figure breaking into Daniel's shop, planting evidence and fleeing. But the most shocking part? The thief's sleeve had rolled up just enough to reveal a distinct tattoo, the same tattoo the prosecutor had on his wrist. A gasp rippled through the room. The prosecutor lunged for the door, but the guards seized him. Daniel's knees buckled. Rocky trotted over and nuzzled his hand, as if to say, "I knew it all along." The judge declared a mistrial on the spot, but the questions were far from over. Why had the prosecutor framed Daniel? And how had Rocky known? The dog had been with a foster family since Daniel's arrest. He shouldn't have even recognized the man, let alone sensed the hidden evidence. As Daniel knelt to hug Rocky, he noticed something odd. The dog's collar was new, and tucked beneath it was a tiny, watertight capsule. Inside was a note, written in a hurried scrawl. "They'll come for you next. Trust no one. Run." Daniel's blood ran cold. Whoever had planted that note had also trained Rocky for this moment. But who? And why? The answers lay somewhere in the shadows, and now both man and dog were targets. The real game was just beginning. The moment Daniel stepped out of the courthouse with Rocky by his side, the weight of what just happened crashed down on him. He was free, technically, but the note in Rocky's collar made it clear this wasn't over. The air smelled like rain, and the sky was darkening, matching the unease in his chest. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about the shocking twist in his case, but Daniel ignored them, his grip tightening on Rocky's leash. The dog was alert, ears twitching at every sound, as if he sensed danger before it arrived. A black SUV with tinted windows idled at the curb, and Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run. But before he could react, a woman in a gray trench coat approached, someone he'd never seen before. "Daniel Carter?" she said quietly, her eyes darting around. "You need to disappear, now." Daniel's pulse spiked. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pressed a key into his palm, a key with a faded label reading Storage 114, before slipping away into the crowd. Rocky growled low in his throat, watching her go. Daniel turned the key over in his hand, his mind racing. Was this a trap, or his only chance at answers? He had no money, no safe place to go, and now someone was clearly hunting him. The SUV's engine revved, snapping him out of his thoughts. He made a split-second decision and bolted, Rocky keeping pace beside him as they vanished into a nearby alley. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a rundown place with flickering lights and broken cameras. Unit 114 was tucked in the farthest corner, rusted and forgotten. Daniel's hands shook as he unlocked it, half expecting an ambush. But inside, there was only a single box, and atop it, a familiar photograph. His breath caught. It was a picture of him and Rocky from years ago, back when Rocky was just a puppy. But that wasn't the strange part. The photo had been taken inside his old apartment, a place he'd never shared with anyone. Underneath the picture was a file labeled Project Guardian, and inside, pages of classified documents detailing experiments on canines for military-grade scent detection. Rocky's name was on the list. Daniel's stomach twisted. Rocky hadn't just smelled the USB on the prosecutor. He'd been trained to find it. But by whom, and why had they chosen him? The file mentioned a shadowy organization called The Chain, but the details were redacted. Just as he reached the last page, Rocky's head snapped up, his body rigid. A car door slammed outside. Footsteps. Too close. Daniel shoved the file into his jacket and grabbed Rocky. "We gotta move," he whispered. But as he turned, a figure blocked the exit, a man in a black tactical vest, his face obscured by a mask. "You weren't supposed to see that," the man said, raising a gun. Rocky lunged before Daniel could react, knocking the man off balance. A shot rang out, missing them by inches. Daniel didn't wait. He and Rocky sprinted into the night, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. Whoever was after them had resources, and they were willing to kill to keep their secrets. But the biggest question still burned in Daniel's mind. Why had Rocky been part of this in the first place? The answer was out there, and now there was no turning back. The night swallowed them whole, as Daniel and Rocky sprinted through the maze of abandoned warehouses near the storage facility. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the ground slick beneath their feet. Daniel's lungs burned, but he didn't dare stop, not when the sound of boots pounding against pavement echoed behind them. Rocky stayed close, his body tense and alert, as if he understood the danger better than Daniel did. They ducked into a narrow alley, pressing against the damp brick wall as a flashlight beam swept past the entrance. Daniel's mind raced. The file in his jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Project Guardian, The Chain. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. Rocky wasn't just a dog. He was a weapon. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure that secret stayed buried. The footsteps faded, but Daniel knew they weren't safe. He pulled out the file again, shielding it from the rain as he flipped through the pages. Most of it was blacked out, but one name stood out. Dr. Evelyn Carter. His breath hitched, That was his mother's name. She'd died in a car accident when he was 12, or at least that's what he'd been told. But according to the file, she'd been part of Project Guardian before her accident. His hands trembled. Had she known what they were doing to these dogs? Had she approved of it? Rocky nudged his leg, snapping him back to reality. They couldn't stay here. They needed shelter, answers, and a way to disappear. A flickering neon sign in the distance caught his eye. Marty's Diner. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Daniel stuffed the file back into his jacket and headed toward it, keeping to the shadows. The diner was nearly empty, save for a tired-looking waitress and a trucker slumped over his coffee. Daniel slid into a booth by the window, Rocky curling up beneath the table. The waitress approached, her eyes lingering on his bruised knuckles and rain-soaked clothes. "Rough night?" she asked. Daniel forced a smile. "You could say that." He ordered 2 burgers, one for him, one for Rocky, and a coffee. As she walked away, his gaze landed on the small TV above the counter. The news was on, and his own face stared back at him. Breaking news. Daniel Carter, recently released due to new evidence, is now wanted for questioning in connection with an assault on a federal officer. Daniel's stomach dropped. Federal officer? The masked man in the storage unit hadn't identified himself. This was a setup. They were painting him as a fugitive. The screen cut to footage of the courthouse, where the prosecutor, now in handcuffs, was being led away. The reporter's voice was grim. Authorities are also investigating possible corruption within the DA's office after a shocking turn of events in the Carter case. So, the prosecutor was going down, but that didn't mean Daniel was in the clear, not when the chain was still out there. The waitress returned with the food, and Daniel ate mechanically, his mind spinning. Rocky devoured his burger in seconds, then rested his head on Daniel's knee, his dark eyes full of unspoken loyalty. Daniel scratched behind the dog's ears, his throat tight. "How did you even find me, huh?" he murmured. Rocky just stared at him, as if the answer was obvious. Maybe it was. Maybe the bond between them ran deeper than training or experiments. Maybe it was the reason they'd both been targeted. A loud bang made Daniel jump. The diner's door flew open, and 3 men in suits strode in. They didn't look like cops. They looked like the kind of men who made problems disappear. Daniel's pulse skyrocketed. Had they been followed? Rocky's growl was barely audible, but the tension in his body was unmistakable. The men scanned the room, their eyes cold and calculating. One of them pulled out a phone, showing the waitress a picture. Her gaze flicked to Daniel for half a second, just long enough. Daniel didn't wait. He threw a 20 on the table, grabbed Rocky's leash, and bolted for the back door. The men shouted, chairs screeching as they gave chase. The kitchen was a blur of steam and shouting cooks as Daniel and Rocky burst through the exit, back into the storm. The alley behind the diner was cluttered with dumpsters and broken crates, perfect for hiding. They ducked behind a stack of pallets, listening as the men fanned out, their voices sharp with frustration. "Find them," one snapped. "He can't have gone far." Daniel held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. Rocky pressed against him, warm and solid. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. And as the rain poured down, washing away their tracks, Daniel realized something terrifying. The only way out was through. They had to uncover the truth about Project Guardian, about his mother, about why Rocky had been sent to him in the first place. Because whatever the chain was hiding, it was worth killing for. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour by the time Daniel and Rocky emerged from their hiding spot, their clothes soaked through and clinging to their skin like a second layer of fear. The men searching for them had moved on, but Daniel knew it was only a matter of time before they doubled back. He needed to think, to find somewhere safe where he could piece together the fragments of this nightmare. The storage facility file was still tucked inside his jacket, though the edges were now damp and frayed. He pulled it out carefully, shielding it from the rain as he scanned the pages again, searching for anything he might have missed. And then he saw it. A small, almost invisible notation at the bottom of one page. Safehouse 7B, grid E42. It was written in his mother's handwriting. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His mother had left him a clue. But where the hell was grid E42? He had no idea, but he knew someone who might. Pulling out his phone, thankfully still functional despite the rain, he dialed the only person he could think of who had both the knowledge and the reason to help him. His uncle, Jack Carter. Jack had been a Marine before retiring, and he'd always been the one to teach Daniel how to handle himself in tough situations. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Daniel? Where the hell are you? The news is saying—" "I didn't do it," Daniel interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "Uncle Jack, I need your help. Someone's after me and it's connected to Mom. Do you know what grid E42 is?" There was a long pause on the other end, so long that Daniel thought the call had dropped. Then Jack exhaled sharply. "Meet me at the old fishing cabin, 2 hours, and Daniel, don't trust anyone else." The line went dead. The fishing cabin. It was a place Jack had taken him as a kid, a rundown little shack by the lake where they'd spent summers fishing and telling stories. It was isolated, which meant it was safe, for now. Daniel shoved the phone back into his pocket and looked down at Rocky. The dog was watching him intently, his ears pricked forward as if he understood every word. "Let's go," Daniel murmured, and they set off toward the outskirts of town, sticking to back roads and alleys to avoid being seen. The journey took longer than expected. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every passing car a potential enemy. By the time they reached the cabin, the storm had worsened, the wind howling through the trees like a warning. The cabin looked just as Daniel remembered. Weathered wood, a sagging porch, and the faint smell of pine and damp earth. But something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but Rocky didn't hesitate. The dog pushed past him, nosing the door open further and stepping inside, his tail stiff with alertness. Daniel followed, his heart pounding. The interior was dark, the only light coming from a single lantern flickering on the table, and sitting in the chair beside it was Uncle Jack. But he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was older, with sharp features and graying hair pulled into a tight bun, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. "Hello, Daniel. It's been a long time." Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. It belonged to Dr. Evelyn Carter, his mother. The woman he'd buried 12 years ago was standing in front of him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Daniel stared at the woman who had just shattered everything he thought he knew. His mother, alive. The shock was so visceral it felt like a physical blow, knocking the breath from his lungs. Rocky let out a low whine beside him, pressing close as if sensing the seismic shift in Daniel's reality. The lantern light flickered across his mother's face, casting shadows that made her look both familiar and eerily foreign. She hadn't aged much, but her eyes were harder now, devoid of the warmth he remembered. "You're supposed to be dead," Daniel whispered, his voice raw. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Dr. Evelyn Carter didn't flinch. "I had to disappear," she said, her tone clinical, as if she were discussing a lab experiment rather than faking her own death. The chain was closing in. If they'd thought for a second I was still alive, they would have used you to get to me. She took a step forward, but Daniel recoiled, his back hitting the doorframe. A dozen questions fought for dominance in his mind, but one burned brighter than the rest. Did you know what they were doing to Rocky? His voice cracked on the dog's name. His mother's gaze flicked to Rocky, and for the first time, something like regret flickered in her eyes. I created Project Guardian, she admitted, and the admission hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. It was supposed to be about search and rescue canines with enhanced olfactory capabilities. But the chain twisted it. They wanted military applications. Assassination, espionage. When I refused, they tried to eliminate me. So I went underground and sabotaged the program from the inside. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver device, a data drive identical to the one Rocky had uncovered in court. This contains everything. Names, locations, proof of their operations, and they'll kill to get it back. Uncle Jack, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. We didn't want to drag you into this, kid. But when Rocky found you after all these years, we knew they'd made their move. That dog was never just a pet. He was programmed to protect you, to lead you to the truth. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Every memory he had of Rocky, every game of fetch, every night the dog had slept at the foot of his bed, suddenly felt like a lie. You used him, he said hoarsely. You used both of us. His mother's expression hardened. I did what I had to do to keep you alive, and now you have a choice. Walk away and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or help me bring the chain down for good. Before Daniel could respond, Rocky's head snapped toward the window, a growl rumbling in his chest. A second later, the night erupted with the sound of screeching tires and shouted orders. Headlights flooded the cabin's front yard. They're here, Jack barked, already moving toward the back door. Evelyn grabbed Daniel's arm, her grip iron. There's no time. We have to go, now. But Daniel hesitated, his eyes locked on Rocky. The dog was staring at him, panting lightly, his tail giving a single, tentative wag. In that moment, Daniel realized it didn't matter what Rocky had been created for. What mattered was here and now. The loyalty in those dark eyes was real. A gunshot shattered the window. Glass rained down as Daniel lunged for Rocky, dragging him to the floor. Move! Jack yelled, kicking open the back door. Evelyn was already halfway out, the data drive clutched in her hand. Daniel scrambled after them, Rocky at his heels, as the cabin filled with armed men. They sprinted into the woods, the trees swallowing them whole. Bullets whizzed past, snapping branches and kicking up dirt. Daniel's lungs burned, but he didn't dare slow down. Somewhere ahead, his mother and uncle were shouting directions, but the roar of blood in his ears drowned them out. Then a searing pain ripped through his shoulder. He stumbled, biting back a cry. Rocky instantly circled back, nudging him forward with frantic urgency. Daniel forced himself to keep running, his vision blurring at the edges. He didn't know where they were going. He didn't know if they'd survive the night. But one thing was certain, the chain had taken everything from him, his freedom, his trust, even his past. And now it was time to fight back. The forest swallowed them whole, the darkness so complete that Daniel could barely see his own hands as they crashed through the undergrowth. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs, the gunshot wound in his shoulder sending waves of white-hot pain through his body with each frantic step. Beside him, Rocky moved like a shadow, his ears flat against his skull, as he guided Daniel through the maze of trees with an almost supernatural precision. Behind them, the shouts of their pursuers grew louder, punctuated by the occasional crack of gunfire that sent birds screeching into the night. Daniel's vision swam, the edges blurring with each pounding heartbeat, but he forced himself to keep moving, because stopping meant death. A hand suddenly grabbed his arm, yanking him behind a thick oak tree. Daniel barely suppressed a cry as he came face to face with his mother, her eyes wide with urgency. "Listen to me," she hissed, pressing a folded piece of paper into his palm. "There's a bunker, half a mile east. Coordinates are here. Jack will meet us there." Before Daniel could respond, a burst of gunfire shredded the bark above their heads. Evelyn shoved him forward. "Go! I'll hold them off!" Daniel wanted to argue, to demand she come with them, but Rocky was already pulling him away, his teeth gently gripping Daniel's sleeve like he understood the unspoken command. They ran, branches whipping at their faces, the sounds of struggle fading behind them. The paper in Daniel's hand felt like it was burning a hole through his skin. His mother was sacrificing herself, again. But this time, he refused to let it be in vain. The bunker was nearly invisible, hidden beneath a tangle of roots and moss. Daniel barely had the strength to pry open the rusted hatch, his fingers slipping on the wet metal. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and old machinery. A single flickering bulb illuminated a sparse space. A cot, a radio, and walls plastered with maps and documents. Jack wasn't there. Rocky let out a sharp bark as Daniel collapsed against the wall, his legs giving out. Blood soaked through his shirt, the pain now a constant, throbbing presence. He fumbled with the radio, his hands shaking as he tried to tune it to a frequency, any frequency that might connect him to help. Static crackled, then a voice, faint but clear. "Repeat, all units converge on Grid E-42. Primary target is armed and dangerous." Daniel's blood ran cold. They were hunting Jack. A noise at the hatch made them both freeze. Rocky positioned himself in front of Daniel, a low growl building in his throat. The metal groaned as it was forced open, and for a heart-stopping second Daniel was sure it was over. Then Jack's face appeared, streaked with dirt and blood. "Damn kid," he wheezed, dragging himself inside before slamming the hatch shut. "You're harder to track than I thought." Daniel didn't have time to feel relief. Jack's shirt was dark with blood, a jagged wound visible just below his ribcage. "They got you," Daniel whispered. Jack grimaced as he pressed a wad of fabric to the injury. "Took 3 of them down first." He nodded to the radio. "They're jamming signals. We're on our own." His gaze flicked to Rocky, then back to Daniel. "But we've got one advantage they don't." Daniel followed his uncle's line of sight. Rocky was staring at a map on the wall, a detailed layout of a facility labeled Chain HQ, Sector 9. The dog's nose twitched, his entire body vibrating with tension. Jack's grin was bloody but fierce. "That mutt knows where they're keeping the rest of the files, the ones that'll bury the chain for good." Daniel's mind raced. His mother's sacrifice, Jack's injuries, Rocky's uncanny instincts, it all led here, to this moment, to a choice. Outside, the sound of engines cut through the night. They were out of time. Jack grabbed Daniel's good shoulder, his grip bruising. "You need to decide. Now, do we run, or do we end this?" Rocky's answering growl was all the confirmation Daniel needed. The bunker's single flickering bulb cast long, jagged shadows across the walls as Daniel studied the facility map, his fingers tracing the labyrinth of corridors and security checkpoints marked in red. Sector 9 wasn't just a headquarters, it was a fortress, buried deep beneath an unassuming government building on the outskirts of the city. The radio crackled again with another transmission, this one more urgent. All teams report to perimeter defense positions. Breach detected in eastern quadrant. Jack let out a hoarse chuckle, wiping blood from his lips. Sounds like your mother's still giving them hell, he muttered, but the pride in his voice couldn't mask the worry. Daniel's stomach twisted. He'd just gotten her back, or thought he had, and now she was out there alone, buying them time with bullets and borrowed seconds. Rocky nudged Daniel's leg insistently, his nose pressing against the map's edge where a single, unmarked tunnel snaked beneath the facility's main defenses. Jack noticed it too. Sewage access, he grunted, tapping the spot. Probably guarded, but it's our best shot. He reached beneath the cot and pulled out a duffel bag, unzipping it to reveal 3 handguns, extra magazines, and, to Daniel's shock, a sleek military-grade vest lined with pouches. Been stashing supplies here for years, Jack said, tossing Daniel a pistol. Never thought I'd be using them with my damn nephew. Daniel caught the weapon awkwardly, the metal cold and foreign in his grip. He'd never fired a gun before. The weight of it, the lethal potential, made his palms sweat. Rocky whined softly, sensing his hesitation. Jack didn't miss it either. Point and shoot, he said bluntly, loading a magazine with practiced ease. And for God's sake, don't hit the dog. The plan was simple. Get in, find the central server room, download the incriminating data Evelyn had referenced, and get out. Simple, but suicidal. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing at Rocky. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body coiled with readiness. He'd been trained for this, bred for it, maybe. But in that moment, Daniel didn't see a weapon. He saw the dog who'd slept at the foot of his bed for years, who'd licked his face after nightmares, who'd waited patiently for scraps at the dinner table. The realization hit him like a bullet. The chain might have created Rocky, but they didn't own him. Not anymore. They moved out under cover of a moonless sky, the distant wail of sirens guiding them toward the facility. The sewage entrance was exactly where the map indicated. A rusted grate half hidden by overgrown weeds. Jack pried it open with a muffled grunt, the hinges screaming in protest. The stench that wafted up was overwhelming. Dank, metallic, thick with decay. Rocky hesitated for only a second before plunging in, his claws clicking against the wet concrete below. Daniel followed, his boots slipping on the slime-coated ladder. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling so low Jack had to crouch. The only light came from a single, wavering flashlight beam that reflected off the sluggish stream of filth they waded through. They'd gone maybe 200 yards when Rocky froze, his body rigid. A second later, Daniel heard it too, voices, echoing from somewhere ahead. Jack killed the light, plunging them into darkness so complete Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. The voices grew clearer, closer. Sweep the tunnel, director's orders. Footsteps splashed through the muck, accompanied by the unmistakable click of a rifle's safety being disengaged. Daniel held his breath. They were trapped. Then, without warning, Rocky lunged forward into the blackness. A man's startled shout was cut off by a snarl, followed by a splash and the sickening crunch of bone. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes lighting the tunnel in strobes of orange. Daniel ducked as a bullet ricocheted off the wall beside his head. Jack returned fire, his shots precise even in the chaos. When the echoes faded, the silence was deafening. Daniel's hands shook as he fumbled for the flashlight. The beam revealed 2 bodies in tactical gear, their throats torn out. Rocky stood over them, panting, his muzzle dark with blood. Jack let out a low whistle. "Good dog," he murmured, but his eyes were wary. Daniel reached for Rocky, his fingers trembling as they brushed the dog's fur. "You okay?" he whispered. Rocky licked his hand once, then turned, his attention already fixed on the path ahead. The tunnel ended at a maintenance shaft, its ladder leading up into the facility's belly. Jack went first, his movements stiff with pain. Daniel followed, his muscles screaming in protest. The shaft opened into a dimly lit hallway lined with pipes, mercifully empty. According to the map, the server room was 3 levels up, accessible only by a keycard-locked elevator or a stairwell that would almost certainly be guarded. They'd just started toward the stairs when the facility's alarm system blared to life. A piercing wail that sent Daniel's pulse into overdrive. Red lights strobed along the ceiling. Security breach in Sector 7, all personnel to lockdown positions. Jack cursed. Evelyn. Daniel didn't need to ask what that meant. His mother had been caught, or worse. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through his veins. He turned to Jack, his voice steadier than he felt. "We split up. You get the data. I'm getting her out." Jack's jaw tightened, but after a beat, he nodded. He handed Daniel a spare magazine and a keycard stolen from one of the dead guards. "Don't die, kid." As they parted ways, Rocky hesitated, his gaze darting between them. Daniel knelt, pressing his forehead to the dog's. "Go with Jack," he whispered. "Keep him safe." For a terrifying second, he thought Rocky would refuse. Then, with a last lingering look, the dog turned and followed Jack into the shadows. Alone now, Daniel moved toward the stairwell, the gun heavy in his hand. Somewhere above him, his mother was fighting for her life, and he was coming for her, chain be damned. The stairwell was a death trap, narrow, poorly lit, and echoing with the distant shouts of armed responders moving through the facility. Daniel climbed with his back pressed against the wall, his injured shoulder screaming with every step, the stolen pistol slick in his sweat-drenched grip. The alarm's wail was constant now, drilling into his skull like a living thing. Sector 7 was 2 floors up, but the moment he pushed open the door to the 3rd-floor landing, he froze. The hallway beyond was a war zone. Smashed monitors littered the floor, their wires sparking. A body in a lab coat lay sprawled near a shattered vial of something neon green and viscous. And at the far end, barely visible through the haze of smoke, was his mother. Evelyn was backed into a corner, her trench coat torn, one arm hanging limp at her side. 3 men in black tactical gear had her pinned, their rifles trained on her chest. But what made Daniel's blood turn to ice was the man standing just behind them. Tall, silver-haired, his crisp suit untouched by the chaos, he held a syringe filled with a swirling, iridescent liquid. "Last chance, Doctor," the man said, his voice smooth as poisoned honey. "Give us the encryption key and I'll make it quick. Otherwise," he nodded to one of the soldiers who racked his slide with deliberate menace. Daniel didn't think. He fired. The shot went wide, embedding itself in the wall, but the distraction was enough. Evelyn moved like lightning, driving her elbow into the nearest soldier's throat. The silver-haired man barely flinched. "Ah," he sighed, as if disappointed. "The prodigal son arrives." He raised a hand, and the remaining 2 soldiers pivoted, their muzzles snapping toward Daniel. Then the ceiling exploded. Concrete rained down as a figure crashed through the ductwork above. Jack, his face a mask of blood and fury, landing squarely on one of the soldiers. Rocky followed, a snarling blur of teeth and fur, going straight for the silver-haired man's throat. The syringe clattered to the floor, rolling toward Daniel's feet. He scooped it up, his fingers closing around the glass just as the man backhanded Evelyn hard enough to send her crashing into the wall. "Enough!" the man roared. He yanked a pistol from his waistband and leveled it at Rocky's head. Time slowed. Daniel saw the trigger finger tighten, saw Rocky's ears flatten, saw his mother's mouth form his name. He lunged, driving the syringe into the man's neck and thumbing the plunger down. The effect was instantaneous. The man's pupils dilated, his skin flushing a sickly gray as veins bulged beneath the surface. He staggered, clawing at his throat, before collapsing in a twitching heap. The remaining soldier froze, his rifle wavering. Jack took advantage, disarming him with a brutal twist before slamming his head into the wall. Silence fell, broken only by the labored breathing of the survivors. Evelyn was the first to speak. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, but her hands trembled as she cupped Daniel's face. Jack kicked the silver-haired man's limp form. "Who the hell is this guy?" "The director," Evelyn said hoarsely. "The architect of Project Guardian." She bent, retrieving the dropped syringe. "And the reason I faked my death, this," she held up the vial, "is Prometheus, a neural enhancer. They've been testing it on the dogs, rewriting their brains to make them perfect killers." Her gaze flicked to Rocky, who was panting at Daniel's side, his muzzle streaked with blood. "But Rocky was different. He imprinted on you as a puppy. No drug could override that bond." Daniel's stomach churned. "You knew they'd send him to me." Evelyn's silence was answer enough. A new alarm blared, this one deeper, more urgent. Detonation sequence initiated, T-minus 10 minutes. Jack cursed. "They're scuttling the facility." Evelyn grabbed Daniel's arm. "The data? Got it," Jack said, patting the hard drive strapped to his vest. "But we need to move. Now." As they sprinted for the exit, Daniel risked one last look at the director's twitching body. The man's lips were moving, forming silent words. Then, impossibly, his hand twitched toward the detonator clipped to his belt. Rocky saw it too. The dog's growl was the only warning before the director's finger closed on the trigger. The explosion ripped through the corridor like a living thing, a wall of fire and debris surging toward them with terrifying speed. Daniel barely had time to register Rocky's frantic bark before Jack was shoving him forward, the heat searing the back of his neck as they dove around a corner. The blast wave lifted him off his feet, slamming him into the concrete hard enough to see stars. For a moment, the world was nothing but ringing silence and choking smoke. Then Evelyn's hands were dragging him up, her lips moving urgently, though he couldn't hear the words. Blood trickled from her temple, her once pristine lab coat now shredded and blackened. Behind them, the hallway was gone, replaced by a gaping maw of twisted metal and flickering flames. Jack hauled Rocky back by his collar as the dog strained toward the wreckage, his fur singed, eyes wild. "No going back now," Jack coughed, spitting out a mouthful of soot. The detonation sequence had been triggered early, too early. That meant the director had planned for this, had wanted them trapped inside when the rest of the charges blew. Evelyn yanked open a maintenance panel beside them, revealing a labyrinth of wiring and a single rusted ladder leading down into darkness. "Sub-level maintenance shaft," she shouted over the roaring fire. "Goes straight to the underground garage." They descended blindly, the rungs burning their palms, the air growing thicker with each step. Daniel's lungs screamed for oxygen, his vision tunneling. Somewhere below, water sloshed, a flooded junction. When his boots finally hit the shallow water, the shock of the cold nearly made him gasp. The garage was ahead, its dim emergency lights revealing rows of armored vehicles, all useless without ignition codes. But it was the far wall that made Evelyn freeze. A reinforced door marked "Quarantine, Live Specimens." A new sound cut through the chaos, barking, not just one dog, dozens. Jack swore. They kept them here. Alive? Evelyn's face was grim. Test subjects for the next batch of Prometheus. She moved toward the door, but Daniel caught her arm. We don't have time. We make time, she snapped, punching in a code. The door hissed open, revealing a nightmare. Rows of cages lined the walls, each containing a dog. German shepherds, Malinois, even a few mutts, all emaciated, their eyes glazed with a sickly, unnatural sheen. Some whimpered. Others threw themselves against the bars in mindless fury, their teeth bared, foam dripping from their jaws. The stench of urine and infection was overwhelming. Rocky let out a wounded sound, pressing against Daniel's leg. Evelyn was already moving down the line, slamming release levers. The drug's still in their systems, she called over her shoulder. They'll attack anything that moves, including us. But I won't leave them to burn. The first dog out was a massive Rottweiler, its ribs visible beneath scarred skin. It lunged, not at them, but past them, vanishing into the shadows. Others followed, a stampede of desperate, broken animals fleeing into the facility's bowels. Jack grabbed Evelyn's shoulder. We need to go. Now. A deep, metallic groan shuddered through the garage as the ceiling above them cracked, sprinklers raining down in a pathetic attempt to quell the inferno. They ran for the exit ramp, the stolen hard drive a lead weight against Jack's chest. The garage door was sealed, but a single emergency release lever glowed red beside it. Daniel wrenched it down. Nothing happened. Then, with a screech of protesting hydraulics, the door began to rise. Outside, the night air was a slap of cold relief. They stumbled into the parking lot just as the second detonation rocked the ground beneath them, throwing them to their knees. The facility imploded in a spectacular fireball, glass and steel raining down in a deadly hail. Daniel rolled onto his back, gasping, staring at the stars. Rocky collapsed beside him, his sides heaving. For a moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Then Evelyn sat up, her voice hollow. Jack, the drive. Daniel turned his head just in time to see Jack clutch at the hard drive strapped to his vest, and the bullet hole punched clean through it. A sniper round. Jack coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. Well, he managed, before his body jerked with a second impact, then a third. The shots were coming from the tree line. Daniel scrambled for cover, dragging Rocky with him as Evelyn crouched over Jack's body, her hands pressing uselessly against the wounds. "Stay down!" she screamed at Daniel, but it was too late. A figure emerged from the smoke, a woman in tactical gear, her rifle trained squarely on Evelyn's chest. Not a soldier, not Chain, the waitress from the diner. "Hello, doctor," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Behind her, the trees rustled with movement. Dozens of figures, all armed, and at their feet the dogs from the lab, ears pinned, lips curled, their drugged eyes reflecting the firelight, waiting for the command to attack. The waitress's smile was a razor-thin slash of triumph in the flickering firelight as she stepped closer, her combat boots crunching over broken glass. The rifle in her hands never wavered, its barrel locked onto Evelyn's forehead with chilling precision. Behind her, the drugged dogs paced like specters, their muscles twitching under matted fur, saliva dripping from jaws clenched in unnatural silence. They weren't just trained, they were waiting. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He knew that stillness. It was the same way Rocky had poised himself before lunging at the prosecutor in court. Evelyn didn't flinch. "Lena!" She spat the name like a curse, her hand still pressed against Jack's bullet-riddled vest. "I should have known the Chain would send their best bitch to clean up." Lena's laugh was a soft, venomous thing. Oh, doctor, I'm not Chain. She tapped the insignia on her sleeve, a wolf's head encircled by thorns. We're the ones who burn chains. The revelation hit Daniel like a gut punch. A rival faction. A worse one. Rocky let out a low, continuous growl, his body tensed between Daniel and the approaching threat. The other dog's ears flicked toward the sound, their haunches quivering. Lena noticed, her gaze dropping to Rocky with something almost like reverence. Ah, the original guardian, the only one who resisted the serum. She tilted her head. Tell me, Daniel, did he ever wake you up at night, whining at shadows, like he was remembering things? Daniel's mouth went dry, because Rocky had. For years, he'd jolted awake from nightmares Daniel couldn't understand. His paws scrabbling at invisible enemies, Evelyn's voice was steel. What do you want? Lena sighed, as if disappointed by the cliché. The same thing you stole, Doctor, the Prometheus formula, not the diluted trash the Chain was peddling. Her boot nudged the ruined hard drive. The real thing, the one you perfected. A lie, a distraction. Daniel saw it a second too late, the subtle hand signal Lena gave behind her back. The dogs moved as one, a snarling wave of teeth and claws, but not toward them. Toward Lena. Rocky's bark was a deafening command. The dogs twisted mid-lunge, their attack veering wildly off course as they crashed into each other, yelping in confusion. Lena's composure shattered. What the... Evelyn was already moving, snatching Jack's fallen pistol and firing twice. Lena staggered, her shoulder blooming red, but her return shot went wide as Rocky hit her like a freight train. The rifle skidded across the asphalt. Chaos erupted. The remaining gunmen opened fire, but their aim was spoiled by the frenzied dogs now turning on them. Daniel grabbed Evelyn's arm, hauling her toward the tree line as bullets shredded the air around them. "Jack!" she choked. "Gone!" Daniel gritted out. The word tasted like ash. They plunged into the forest, branches whipping at their faces, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Rocky materialized at Daniel's side, his fur streaked with blood that wasn't his own. Evelyn was limping badly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "There's a safe house," she panted. "West, river access." Daniel didn't ask how she knew, didn't ask anything. The night had peeled back too many layers already. The river was a black ribbon under the moonlight, its current swift and silent. A decrepit boathouse loomed ahead, its dock sagging with rot. Evelyn fumbled with a hidden keypad beneath the stairs. The door creaked open, revealing a sparse room with a radio, a weapons locker, and a man sitting at the table. Daniel's pulse skyrocketed. Then the man turned, and the world tilted. The prosecutor. The one from the courtroom. The one Rocky had exposed. Except now he was holding a syringe of swirling, iridescent liquid, and smiling. "Took you long enough," he said, rising. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She shot him point blank between the eyes. The body crumpled. The syringe rolled. And Rocky let out a whine so full of grief it shattered something in Daniel's chest. Because the dog wasn't looking at the corpse. He was staring at the photograph that had fallen from the man's pocket. A younger, happier version of the prosecutor, kneeling beside a puppy with familiar golden fur. A puppy named Rocky. The silence in the boathouse was deafening. Daniel stared at the photograph, his hand shaking as he picked it up. The man he'd only known as a corrupt prosecutor, the one who had framed him, the one Evelyn had just killed, was smiling in the picture, ruffling the fur of a tiny German shepherd puppy with a familiar white blaze on its chest. Rocky. The date scrawled in the corner was from 5 years ago, before the experiments, before everything. Evelyn sank into a chair, her face ashen. "His name was Marcus Vales," she said quietly. "He wasn't just Chain, he was Rocky's first handler. Before the project twisted him." Daniel's throat tightened. Rocky was sniffing at the dead man's hand, his tail tucked between his legs, a soft whimper escaping him. He remembered. All this time, he'd remembered. Evelyn's voice was hollow. Marcus was the one who realized what Prometheus could really do. Not just enhance, erase, rewrite loyalty. He tried to smuggle Rocky out when he saw what they were turning the dogs into. They caught him, broke him, made him their puppet. She looked at Daniel, her eyes glassy with exhaustion and grief. But Rocky never forgot. That's why he went for Marcus in court. Not because of the USB, because he knew his real handler was still in there somewhere. The weight of it crushed Daniel. All this time he'd thought Rocky was his, but the dog had been someone else's first. Someone who had loved him enough to risk everything, just like Daniel had. Outside, the distant wail of sirens cut through the night. They were out of time. Evelyn pushed herself up, limping to the weapons locker. She tossed Daniel a loaded pistol and a set of car keys. "There's a jeep hidden half a mile north. Take it. Go somewhere the Chain and their enemies will never find you." Daniel didn't move. "What about you?" Her smile was sad. "I have to finish this. The real Prometheus formula, the one that undoes the damage, is still in my head. I won't let it die with me." Rocky whined, pressing against Daniel's leg. The choice was clear. He could run, start over, keep the last living piece of his shattered world safe. Or he could fight. Daniel slid the pistol into his waistband and picked up the syringe from the floor, the one Marcus had been holding. The label read, "Reversion Protocol." He looked at Rocky, then at Evelyn. "We are not leaving you." For the first time in years, his mother's eyes shone with something like hope. Moral lesson. True loyalty isn't programmed, it's chosen. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand by those who've stood by you, no matter the cost. The sirens grew louder. The night stretched before them, dark and uncertain. Together, they stepped into it.